Hey guys, welcome to American Thought Project. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about something in this vein. So, the Statue of Columbus is coming down at Columbus State Community College in Columbus, Ohio. Yes, you heard me correctly. They're starting by taking the statue down, where the college is named after the same guy and the city is named after the same guy. So this idea of erasing history, where does it start, where does it end, and why is it happening?
Yeah.
We see it on a daily basis. It rears its head, now and then. We're in a specific time where it's just raging, I think, to a level we have not seen before.
Also
And
global.
say that again.
It's also global.
Yeah, a global movement to erase history that is eerily familiar. If you have read George Orwell's 1984, we are basically living in that moment right now, where there is no past, there is no future. We only live in the everlasting present. So, I think we want to frame this up in a couple ways. Like, Nick, what do you like? Why? Why does this happen? Why do we, as a population, want to start tearing down and just ridiculing everything in our past?
Yeah, for context, it's late June 2020, so the country is going through a very, very profound racial movement. And I think one of the themes that's coming along with it is embarrassment of our past, about certain aspects of it, and about some of the fundamental natures of what the country stands for. And so we have been seeing, in the midst of all of the civil unrest, is a tearing down of anything that resembles things in our past that we don't like or that we're embarrassed about. Anything from slavery to the discovery of the continent and manifest destiny, and the travesties that were, committed against the Native Americans during those times. Anything of that sort. And we're seeing it pretty much pervasively across the country, causing a lot of tension and issues today.
Yeah. I think to just jump to this state that we want to destroy everything and make it as if it didn't exist and create this new point in time, if you will, kind of stems from this level of arrogance and ignorance of like the context of the time that these people lived in, right? Like, it's not that hard to both acknowledge the great things that people do and also acknowledge the tragedy and the moral shortcomings. Like, we as people are flawed individuals, and to apply the moral standards of today to the past, to me, is just utterly ignorant to the realities of life. Like, you can look backwards in hindsight. It's 2020. We have an unfair vantage point, but you can see moral progression, moral improvements from the beginning of time until we are today. And I think we leave out this idea of putting ourselves contextually in that space. And what was it like being an individual that had the moral courage to maybe step out of orthodoxy in the time? Even though you were conflicted, even though you still lived out some very tragic and nasty things in some areas of your life, I think there's something to be said for the human being living in a conflicted state and having moral courage to be like, as we speak about America specifically, to be like, you know what? I don't think some of these institutions or some of the ways we act line up with this moral commitment that we just made in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, I feel like the idea of looking back with context of what we know and believe today as a society and saying that in condemning certain activity and then trashing those people for it, that is It comes from a place of arrogance because there was only one guy who was perfect and he could walk on water. His name was Jesus. But, other than that, we're flawed people, right?
Right.
So it's how can we possibly apply a standard of perfection, the Jesus standard effectively, to people in history and then overlook any good things that they did and then start to deface and trash their reputations because we don't like
Yeah.
things that were happening at the time. And even condemning a person is one thing, but the attempt at erasing history because we don't agree with it is just absolutely ludicrous. History isn't there for us to enjoy. History is there for us to look back on, reflect, make sure we don't commit future travesties,
Yeah.
and to learn from our past. You don't get to pick and choose history. I
Yeah.
just think that whole idea is wild.
Yeah. I think, the population, specifically among younger, wildly leftist, capital L leftist, not political left, but leftist mob, they seem to be unable to acknowledge just these basic nuances of life. And, namely that what I said earlier, that great people can also do bad things, or certain strains in the moral fiber of an individual can set forth a journey of extreme progress, while other strains in the moral fiber of that being can be acting out nefarious, um, habits, right? Like, think about living in a time that evil institutions are the norm. They are not derided, they are celebrated, and they are fought for. Think about being born into that, and then all of a sudden starting to be conflicted to a state within yourself that you are willing to risk your life to just make a little incremental change that hopefully brings about big change. Um, so this idea, I keep on going back to that. I like the term. I've kind of coined it in my own mind of flawed greatness, right?
Yeah.
And we have gotten to this point where they're toppling statues of Thomas Jefferson. Okay, yes, he owned slaves. This is bad. You can, if anyone who's done any research on him can easily see he is one of the most kind of double-minded people and very conflicted people while owning slaves and having intimate relationships with slaves. But we can't just ignore the fact that he wrote the words. He wrote the words that led to the emancipation, suffrage for women, the civil rights for the lowest, smallest minority. Um, his words that he came out fiercely against slavery. Many times proposed a bill that would have eliminated slavery in, I believe, the Ohio Valley, lost by one vote. So that you can't categorically say someone's bad and evil when simultaneously they set in motion the most radically equitable sentence, in literature outside of the
Yeah.
Bible.
I think there's an important distinction between, when it comes to monuments, right? Monuments that we choose to remove or leave in place, and ideas that go along with those things. I think there's a difference between glorification of travesty and um, just showing history, right?
Yeah,
Just expressing as a fact and looking at someone for other things than what you might think or not think. So, like for example, when I think about like the Confederate flag, NASCAR just ruled that they're not allowing Confederate flags at their races anymore. In my personal opinion, and again, I was raised in Texas, so kind of a country of its own, not really the deep South, but it's certainly in the South. Um, I would say that the Confederate flag, like there's no way to distinguish the Confederate flag from slavery. Like it's almost it's almost a pure symbol. Just as we would say that the Nazi swastika and the Nazi flag is synonymous with systematic racism. I don't think we can separate those two. And so there's no argument that I can say that, oh, I think it's cool if I fly this flag as it's part of my heritage. I just think that is like glorification of tragic past, and we should not allow those things and condemn that sort of behavior and that like in your face sort of thing. But a Confederate soldier and a statue of just a Confederate soldier, I cannot say that guy was fighting for slavery. Most of the Confederate soldiers were fighting because they needed a job. And you can criticize certain people, and don't get me wrong, like the Confederacy definitely stood for slavery, and that was pretty much the number one thing that they were going to war over. But I think we just need to be cautious, not be capricious, which is right, just knee-jerk reactions. We've talked about the dangers of knee-jerk reactions to things that we don't like, and just to make sure that we're not going too far and just attempt to just erase things that we don't like. Doesn't eliminate them, right? It happened. Sorry, guys, it happened. And I think the most important thing is that we learn from it.
Yeah. I mean, there's room for a real, honest debate on, hey, these things, I don't know, we as a society should really be elevating whatever it is, right? There's room for those honest debates. I think what shouldn't happen is lawlessness to achieve an end, right? And you get people saying, well, the colonials, they toppled down a statue of King George and melted it into, bullets, and we declared war, okay? Like, we're not in war right now. So when you declare a war, you're essentially saying we are no longer under your laws. So those actions really aren't lawless anymore.
Right.
We're a civil society, okay? So let's have an intelligent debate, an intelligent discussion about should X, Y, or Z be brought down. Because we're to a point now where crosses are they want to take down crosses. They want to eliminate George Washington. They want to eliminate Thomas Jefferson. I mean, it's to the point where lawlessness is the means to achieve their desired end.
Because you don't want to put in the work and have a debate and have a discussion and come to a conclusion and then decide as a community whether or not something needs to stay. We're just seeing, like you said, lawless defacements.
Right. And most of these people, they don't know the first thing about any of the folks that they're saying they want to get rid of or they want to cancel, right? I mean, Benjamin Franklin, Benjamin Franklin was a proponent for abolition from the onset. A number of abolitionist statues they're trying to get rid of. A statue of Abraham Lincoln that was built and paid for by freed slaves, they're trying to petition to get removed. I mean, so just to your point, though, around the Confederate flag, I think that speaks to kind of this larger idea that I've been grappling with a lot lately, that's you may think that the Confederate flag is like part of your heritage, but it has been hijacked from you, and it is now the symbol of something evil and wrong.
That's a good point.
What do you care more about? Being morally correct and standing up for what's right, or a symbol that you have an affinity to for maybe okay reasons, but by you, sticking your heels in the ground and not budging, you are promoting something that is evil and wrong. To me, hey, and this isn't me, but if I have some affinity to the Confederate flag because it's part of my heritage, which ironically enough, many Black Southerners do, it's a little bit of a unorthodox viewpoint in my opinion, but I'm willing to give up a symbol for the higher value of standing for what is right.
Yeah. For example, the Nazi Party was actually known for being like really pro animal rights. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like really pro animal rights. So just imagine if you were a German today in modern times and you were saying, I love the Nazi swastika and I fly the Nazi flag because it's part of our history, it's part of our country, and I love animals, and that's why I think that we should fly the Nazi flag. Like, obviously, the majority of society is going to be like, no, that
Yeah.
although it may represent that to you, it has been hijacked and it is absolutely undisputed known to represent some of the worst tragic atrocities on
Yeah.
humankind in the history of civilization. So like you're not justified
Yeah.
in flying the Nazi flag in front of your house. I feel like it's pretty similar to the Confederate flag today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think too, there has to be this element of humility, right? Like, if people's perception is reality, and you doing something or standing for something um, seemingly innocuous is going to just shut off communication. It's going to um, render a conversation irrelevant. It's going to lead to disunity instead of unity as a society. Then I mean, have some humility. Like, what's the bigger what is the most important thing here? Let's major on the majors, right? Like, let's have a unified society. Let's have discussions with people. And if this symbol has been hijacked, then you know what? It's time to create another one.
Yeah, yeah.
That doesn't mean we have to erase it, but let's at least move away from like this in your face um, kind of celebration. But
That is so openly and knowingly offensive to a large portion of the population. But
yeah,
to return to the idea of how we judge people in the past, like why is it that we're doing this with just these political figures in history? Like for example, like Steve Jobs. I mean, he's obviously credited with building an amazing company that has changed the face of society today. Yet he was also known for like being a womanizer and a terrible father and several other things. And people have all sorts of objections to parts of his character, but they're still willing to lend credit to the genius that he was. Like why are we not doing the same thing for other historical figures? Why can't we look at someone and say this person was wrong, we condemn that, this about and give credit where it's also due, especially when we look back at people like the founding fathers.
yeah. And you mentioned at the onset that it's global. I mean, Winston Churchill. I mean, Boris Johnson had to come out with a statement as to why they weren't going to remove a statue of Winston Churchill
Imagine
because,
having to educate your country about that.
I mean, hello. So let me get this straight. Antifa, anti-fascist, wants to take down a statue of the most ferociously anti-fascist leader arguably the world has ever known. And they want to criticize him for saying some racist comment. I honestly don't know what it was, and just deride him as a categorical racist when this guy fought was the tip of the spear against the most systematically racist entity of the modern world, the Nazis, that were literally in the act of genocide of a race and wanted a supreme race. Now, because he said some comment, we don't even know the context. We don't even know, if it was meant as a derogatory statement, to say we don't really know, right?
And say it was. Say it was.
Yeah,
say
even
it
if
was a derogatory statement.
right. He would be the definition of someone, a flawed,
yeah,
great person, a person who is a good person that has flaws. And yeah, it's just that is outrageous. I think so. We've kind of there's a couple categories, right? There's the hey, let's deride and let's condemn just all these people categorically if they ever had one mistake. That's one thing. Then the other thing is the complete rewriting of history. So the first step around the Christopher Columbus thing was, hey, he's bad. He's not a hero. He's a villain. And here's why. And then all of this literature and documents continue to be built on an utterly faulty premise. Like, if, we're not going to go through the whole thing here, go down the rabbit trail, but anyone who wants to study around Christopher Columbus and all of the bad things said about him, they all lead down to documents written by his chief political opponent, who swindled him out of power in the West Indies, who had political motives to talk poorly about him. One set of facts. And then the other set is Christopher Columbus adopted a Native American. Christopher Columbus executed Spaniards for their maltreatment of Native Americans. Christopher Columbus refused money from the crown because they wouldn't strike from the record this libel that his political opponent had written about him in the West Indies. So it's like, we've gone past the destroy the symbols of history, and now we're to the point where we want to rewrite it with no good primary source to do so. It's wild to me.
Explorer. He was known for being an explorer. The voyage in 1492 that discovered North America to the Europeans, like just taking a certain detail that you don't like and then blowing it up. That is just, it comes from a place of arrogance and ignorance. Like, that's just the way it is. And I mean, where do we draw the line on this? Like, are we going to go tear down the pyramids because they were built by slaves?
Yeah.
Are we going to go tear down the Great Wall of China because it was built by slaves? They were buried underneath the wall as it was built.
Well, apparently we are going to destroy everything because, like I talked about the Emancipation Statue in Boston, I mean, it's about freeing the slaves, but since freed slaves paid for it, we're going to get rid of it. I don't know. I think this brings us to the conclusion, kind of, that this whole, we'll call it a movement, so to speak, right now, isn't about having an honest discussion about history and calling balls and strikes on this is wrong. We need to admit it. This is right and this is good. We need to celebrate it. And where we feel like we've crossed the line and we're revering something that's wrong, we need to have a discussion as a society about removing, relocating something, right? Let's have a discussion about it. But it's all about destruction right now. We talked about it with the Antifa, the anarchy stuff. Just destroy. There's no real nuanced, or not nuanced. There's no real defined goal. It's just kind of destroy and create chaos. I think that's kind of what we're seeing here too. It's like you're using a topical event that is deep-seated and very emotional as leverage or as an excuse to destroy. To me, I think that's kind of where we are. There's no honest discussion about history, and then there's this almost willful ignorance of the realities of life, that we are not to be judged by the Jesus standard, that we can admit that 250 years ago the moral standards weren't where we wanted them to be, and thank God we have made moral progress today. And we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think my last thought also is, just because something offends you does not give you the right to mob style go out and attack that thing.
Yeah.
Things offend people all over the place, especially in today's society, for a million different reasons. But we all agree that unjustified mob tactics are just not what the country needs. It's not going to help anything, and it's just going to make us even more divided when we are in a time when unity is the only way that we are going to survive.
Yeah. And I think if we have an honest discussion, we will be more unified. Like, just like we need to be critical of those in the past and critique, we need to be critical and critique the motives of folks in the present pushing certain agendas, whether we agree with them or not. We need to be critical. Like here, let me just read this quote by Carol Delaney, who, if anyone wants to read about Columbus, I would recommend her. She says, as American citizens, we need to remember our history, both the good and the bad, so that we are not set up to repeat history's mistakes. We need to take an honest look at all of our forefathers. We need to give them the credit they deserve for what they did well, while being mindful of the things that should have been done differently or better. Like, this is an honest approach, right?
Yeah.
And then I also think, just to kind of build on that, if we want to change culture, you change culture by creating alternatives, creating something better. You don't change culture by destroying.
And then see what happens.
Yeah, that is not a good recipe. You know, we were built, I think we were made as humans to create things. So that is ultimately what has brought about cultural change. I mean, if you just look in the mirror, what brought about cultural change, and sometimes we think cultural change needs to happen instantaneously. That's not the case. You know, this, if you look at the history of time, it's a far wider scope than our narrow minds or just our lives here on earth. We take America, we created America, and it drove cultural change, and it's taken 250 plus years to get to the point we are now. But the idea is we created something. We created an alternative to despotic rule where man ruled over man, where slavery was a global institution, where one sex was dominant over the other sex, where unorthodox ideas were condemned and punishable by imprisonment and death and being ostracized from society. America's creation changed culture to a place where none of those things exist over time. So to me, that's a great example. And, you know, the podcast is American Thought Project. So when we think about that, that is the ultimate creation that drove so much societal and culture change. But it wasn't like we just destroyed every vestige of Great Britain. We created something.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's the message. Like, let's create culture that we can unify in. And if that does mean we need to remove stuff that causes tremendous pain and discomfort for people in our society, then let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. But lawless means just is going to create more division, because it's going to have the people who maybe don't feel the pain from that, they're going to dig their heels in potentially, because it's like, whoa, we're now in a lawless society and these people are running rampant. I'm not really down for that. I don't want to give in to that. And it creates a false dichotomy.
Yeah. A problem where there doesn't need to be one.
Exactly.
Anyway, those are my thoughts. Anything else you got?
No, I think, you know, let's just end on that note. If we want to change culture in any area, let's create new alternatives and better ways forward, instead of focusing on destroy, destruct, deride. And let's have a more honest discussion about the realities of life, and that good people do bad things, and that sometimes bad people do good things. We're a mixture of greatness and sin. We're a mixture of brilliance and blindness. Like, we are not a perfect being. So let's have some humility as we analyze things. So with that, until next time, American Thought Project, be sure to like, subscribe, share, give us your comments below.
Thanks, everybody.